Good evening, and thank you for joining us at this Freedom Lecture in memory and in honor of Daphne Caruana Galizia. It's a privilege for me to welcome John Sweeney to deliver this first Freedom Lecture. 39 years ago today, tyranny struck violently in this town, and the targets of that strike were surgical. However chaotic the night itself was. One target was the home of the political leader leading the resistance against the overwhelming force of authoritarianism. His house was ransacked with his wife and children therein, and they had real fear for their life. The other target was the printing press of Malta's newspaper of record, set on fire as the journalists working there ran for their lives. Family and journalists, the last refuge of the fight for what is right when everything else gives way. Tomorrow, it will be a year since the fear that was felt all those years ago rushed over our country again. But this time it was coupled with guilt, shock, and disappointment, because we realized that we had lowered our guard and were missing the signs of slippage back to a time when we could not take even our basic freedoms for granted. Last Saturday, John was asked why he accepted to come to Malta today. I suppose he'll tell us more about that shortly, but his answer last Saturday was stark. Because an attack on a journalist is an attack on all journalists, and the murder of a journalist is a terrible thing. I feel that democracy and free speech and the rule of law are under attack across the world right now, and one of the great defenders of free speech, democracy, and the rule of law is the freedom of troublemaking reporters doing their job without fear or favor. I say stark. It should be an easy enough concept to grasp. But as we know, we're having some trouble putting the point across here. I met John Sweeney when he was here last January working on a film for BBC Newsnight on the assassination of Daphne Caruana Galizia. He told me he first read Daphne's blog because of this assignment, and at first wondered if it might be over the top. Then he started trying to get answers out of Malta's government, and he stopped thinking it was over the top. He started to think it was proportionate to the stubborn obtuseness of the guys wearing the regalia of statehood here. In his own words, they are great guys. John Sweeney has found ways of getting his questions answered by Putin's regime, the dictatorships of North Korea and Zimbabwe, and with mixed success even from the cult of Scientology. Whatever the warped nature of the answers he got, the first quality of a journalist is the quality of his or her questions. And John Sweeney became an instant celebrity in Malta when he asked he who shall not be named how he feels about the fact that some would say he is the artful dodger of Europe. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you John Sweeney.
Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Good evening. I never had the honor of meeting Daphne Caruana Galizia, but I've been given a bittersweet challenge to give the first lecture, the first Freedom Lecture in tribute to her work. Hours before she died, she wrote, "There are crooks everywhere you look now. Not here, not tonight, not in this room, I hope." Daphne Caruana Galizia was an extraordinary human being. If you needed proof of that, you only have to look at the dignity and the tenacity of her family in this dark time. Her husband Peter and her three sons, Matthew, Andrew, and Paul, have conducted themselves with honor. I wish I could say the same of others. The time of her killing, 3 p.m. on the 16th of October 2017, was a knife slash in time when Malta became much closer to being a mafia state. The island had withstood the very worst that fascism could throw at it in the 20th century, but it succumbed at that moment. The remote-controlled bomb was triggered to something insidious and dark and very 21st century, the reach of a multinational mafia to subvert and undermine the rule of law. Before I go much further, I should point out that although I work for the BBC, these are not the views of the BBC, and that I have nothing whatsoever to do with any political party on Malta. I never came to Malta until Daphne's killing, but I have to say that your island is beyond wonderful. The tragedy of her killing and the beauty of this place is best told in one sentence by Nicholas Montserrat in his wonderful novel, The Capellan of Malta. Now there was only silence, silence and peace, and the feeling of history encased in golden stone. Malta is one of the most beautiful, entrancing, yet bloody infuriating places I have ever visited in my life. And by the way, that does include North Korea and somebody from Malta, and I'm not going to identify them, said, "John, you've got to understand, Malta is North Korea with palm trees." That's unfair, but you get the drift. I'm here because Daphne loved Malta, and I do a little bit too. I'm here too because I believe passionately in democracy and free speech, and sometimes the best defenders of those two pillars of civilized society are troublemaking reporters allowed to do their job without fear or favor. You've got to have fervor. You can't have favor. Around the world, the story is bleak and getting bleaker by the day. Journalists keep on getting snuffed out. The disappearance of Jamal Khashoggi is not that much of a mystery. The evidence points to murder, most foul. But it's happening here in Europe too. In the last 12 months, Europe has lost 3 brave reporters: Daphne Caruana Galizia, Jan Kuciak of Slovakia, and just the other day, Victoria Marinova of Bulgaria. All 3 broke corruption scandals. All 3 were murdered. That's 3 too many, and it's got to stop. May I admit to you a dark fantasy? I often daydream about what it may be like to be a PR man for, say, your Prime Minister, Joseph Muscat. For me to be Kurt Farrugia. As I said, a dark fantasy. You may know that I was, I think, the last troublemaking reporter to interview your Prime Minister, Joseph Muscat. Afterwards, Kurt Farrugia came up to me and he suggested that in my interview with Prime Minister Joseph Muscat, I was unnecessarily hostile. Kurt, how could you? I'm not having that. This is what I'm like when I'm guilty of that charge.
To him.
Okay.
What evidence, Sean Lonsdale, do you have that people have been tortured?
Oh, Tommy,
you didn't do that.
No, hold a second, Tommy. No, stop there, Tommy.
No, I'm not stopping here. You listen to me for a second.
No.
You're accusing members of my religion of engaging in brainwashing.
No, Tommy, you stop! No, listen to me! You were not there at the beginning of that interview! You were not there! You did not hear or record all of the interview! Do you understand?
Brainwashing is a crime against humanity.
You are quoting the second half of the interview, not the first half! Listen to me. As I understand it, Prime Minister Joseph Muscat is not yet a member of the Church of Scientology. But the Church of Muscatology, it's got a certain ring about it. A cult here in Malta, could that be possible? You know better than I. Now, Daphne's friends would freely admit that she was no saint. No feisty reporter ever is. There were times when perhaps you could say that her fury at what was happening to her beloved island made her lose her cool. That, you could say, her language at times should have been more temperate, more diplomatic. But I believe that Daphne Caruana Galizia made a judgment, that she saw a tsunami of corruption coming at Malta, and she had to raise the alarm at the top of her voice. She feared that if she didn't, that monstrous killer wave could sweep over her island. She was sued countless times. The legal menaces were by no means the gravest dangers. Daphne was no fool. She knew the risks she was taking. One family dog had its throat cut, a terrier was poisoned, a third dog, a collie, was shot. In the middle of the night, used tyres had been stacked at the back of her house and set fire to with petrol, but one of her boys saw the fire and raised the alarm. But she also knew the counter risk of shutting up, of letting the scandals continue unprotested, and for her, that was the greater danger. As I've said, I never met her, but she reminds me of a woman I did have the honor to meet, Anna Politkovskaya. She was a Russian journalist and shot dead in Moscow in 2006 on, it just so happens, Vladimir Putin's birthday. To this day, the person who ordered Anna's assassination has yet to be charged or tried, let alone convicted. Daphne, like Anna, was made intensely angry by what was happening to her country, and she loved it so much she could not hold her tongue. But, and let's not forget this for a second, Daphne, like Anna, was on the money. The dirty money, that is. Time and again, Daphne's reporting in her amazing blog, read by more people than Malta has inhabitants, told the truth. Eventually, the truth became too much for a person or some people who knew people who killed people. The assassination of Daphne Caruana Galizia a year ago tomorrow was a monstrous crime. It blew the manhole cover off a hidden sewer of corruption running from the world's dirty money capitals into this island, into the island of Malta. 3 local men have been accused of killing her by car bomb. Brothers George and Alfred Di Giorgio and Vincent Muscat deny all charges. If the evidence presented thus far is correct, they are the trigger men, not the person or people who ordered the hit. That person or those persons remain at large for now. Daphne had a rich and dark sense of humor, but even she would have gasped at some of the revelations that have come out after her murder. To address those allegations properly, I have to have an eye on the law of libel. Daphne was one of the most sued reporters on earth. At the time of her death, there were 47 outstanding libel actions against her. To do justice to Daphne's work and to avoid libel charges as best one can, it's vital to intone 5 words. They are, all concerned deny any wrongdoing. As I believe we're in a church building, may I ask you to repeat those words, kind of like a bidding prayer. All concerned deny any wrongdoing.
All concerned deny any wrongdoing.
Bright people. When alive, she pointed a finger at the murk surrounding the government of Malta's Prime Minister, Joseph Muscat. The funny, peculiar relationship between Muscat and former British Prime Minister Tony Blair. Allegations of dirty money flowing from the fabulously corrupt Azerbaijan first family to Prime Minister Muscat's family.
All concerned deny wrongdoing.
Allegations against a funny, peculiar bank, Pilatus, run by an Iranian with 3 St. Kitts passports and 2 different dates of birth. Allegations against Mr. Passports, also known as Dr. Christian Kalin, a Swiss entrepreneur who flogs nationality status the way others flog dodgy motors.
All concerned deny wrongdoing.
And Malta's economics minister, Chris Cardona, who, wait for it, who, she alleged, skipped his homework for an economics conference in favor of a threesome in a German brothel. But since her killing, more facts have come out about every single one of these stories. To take one simple example, what's happened to the Iranian owner of Pilatus Bank, Ali Sadra? He hotly defended his good name against Daphne's journalism. In early January, I got a letter from Schillings, a very expensive London law firm specialising in libel. Its client was Pilatus Bank, and the letter complained that points Mr. Sweeney now raises are demonstrably false, which the most cursory of online searchers would have revealed. The letter goes on to refer to a previous letter which gave notice of the true position and repeated the obvious and demonstrable falsity of Mr. Sweeney's new points. Oh dear. The true position is that Pilatus Bank is now under administration and Mr. Ali Sadra has been arrested by the FBI on charges of money laundering and bank fraud. Mr. Sadra denies wrongdoing but faces trial not here but in the United States. If convicted, Ali Sadra could go to prison for 125 years. Oh dear, oh dear, oh dearie, dearie me. And Schillings doesn't write to me anymore about Pilatus Bank. What about Daphne's reporting on Henley and Partners, providers of passports to the not good, the bad and the ugly? Daphne, with her long hair and black eyes, had something of the sorceress about her. Her enemies called her the witch of, I'm going to pronounce this wrong. You heard it there. They called her the witch of Bidnia, the hamlet where she lived. Magically or not, she had got hold of a chain of emails between the Prime Minister, his Chief of Staff and wheeler-dealer Keith Shembury, and Christian Kalin, President of Henley and Partners, also known as Mr. Passports. All concerned. In the email chain, the PM, his wheeler-dealer, and Mr. Passports sanctioned a judicial attack on Daphne and anyone else who dared to question their activities. Daphne had written an open letter to Mr. Passports in May 2017 in her customary punchy style. She wrote, "I do not appreciate your threat to sue me in London. The reason you are doing it is not because most of your business is there. Most of your business comes from shady people in Russia and the Middle East, with the occasional Vietnamese MP thrown in. The reason you are threatening to sue me in London is because you imagine that I am somebody from the sticks who is frightened of the words London, UK courts, and high costs. She wasn't. Good on her." Early in 2017, Daphne had reported that Chris Cardona, the economics minister of Malta, had been spotted in a brothel in Germany when he was officially on government business attending a conference. Cardona denied this and sued, and had got a court order against her, freezing her bank accounts. Daphne counterattacked by asking the court to get Cardona's mobile phone records, which could pinpoint his location in the brothel, or, as he explained, sleeping peacefully in his hotel some miles away. Cardona's phone records were obtained, but the evidence uncovered has not been heard. That is because Cardona has now withdrawn his libel action. Fancy that. How can I fairly reflect the Prime Minister's position on this, and in particular, allegations against his own family, that Mrs. Muscat received $1 million bung? The best way, perhaps, is to hear from the man himself.
Well, Malta's Prime Minister, Joseph Muscat, has given a Newsnight an interview about all of this. John met up with him in Valletta.
What's been the effect of her assassination on your own standing, sir?
Well, bad. Definitely. Because that's not something that any Prime Minister would want. She was a very vociferous critic of many people. I might have been the top of that list. And this doesn't look good on me. I'm very realistic on this. Besides her family, I think if there is one person that has suffered from this assassination, it's us. Just because this long shadow has been cast on us.
1 week after Daphne's assassination, where were you and what were you doing?
1 week?
1 week. A week after?
I wouldn't know, honestly.
You were in Dubai selling passports for €650,000.
I wasn't, we don't sell. We have, as other European jurisdictions, other European countries, systems by which, and programs, and ours is the most transparent and open program. People can invest in our country, can have residence, and even citizenship.
Who's buying these passports?
Well, various people, wealthy people. Not wealth doesn't buy you the right to citizenship.
It helps if you've got €650,000 though.
It helps, but it doesn't mean that you would get access to our program.
The law, though, says that the minister responsible, and I believe that's you, the Prime Minister, can override a problem. For example, if somebody's got a criminal record or is being under a criminal investigation.
The system has never been overridden.
Tell me about your family's relationship with the first family of Azerbaijan.
Well, I met President Aliyev, I believe, twice in Baku. Number of times when we were at the EU Eastern Partnership summits. Mrs. Aliyeva came here once. She met with my wife. That's it. That's the relationship.
Nothing more?
Nothing more.
Daphne said there was a lot more. $1 million.
Well, you know, I don't think you can hide $1 million. I don't think you can hide $100. Definitely not in the bank. You know, definitely not anywhere else. You know.
Does Malta have a problem with money laundering?
I don't feel comfortable in saying no, we don't have any problems, or yes, we have problems. I'd say we have as many problems as any other jurisdiction, be it the City of London, be it Luxembourg, be it the Netherlands, when it comes to making sure that we comply with the rules. In any way, I don't want to be seen. I know I'm in a quite uncomfortable situation having to criticize someone who has been killed brutally. But I hope we're not in a situation where in any democracy situations are such where if someone writes something on social media, it's taken as a fact.
But you're doing exactly that though, aren't you? She was killed brutally, and you're saying that at least some of the time she was running gossip.
Yes.
She had evidence. You don't agree with it, you don't think it's right, but she did have evidence. She's got a whistleblower.
No,
she said she had
I
it.
totally disagree, because I read exactly what she said. So, first of all, there isn't a shred, not only of proof, of truth in what she said on all this. She based herself on a person calling herself a whistleblower, and the account of this whistleblower is dubious, to say the least. What I'm saying is that not only if there is evidence, if there is even the whiff of any evidence to this, I would resign on the spot. And yes, I'm sorry. The issue with Ms. Caruana Galizia is that she said things that were facts. She wrote stories that were cutting edge, but then these were coupled by things that were false. No, I don't know whether she knew that what she was saying against me or about me was false, whether she was part to this invention, or whether she was fed the story by this whistleblower or someone else, and maybe it looked too good not to be true. Let's put it that way, because it fitted the narrative that some people wanted to put in.
The charge in a nutshell is that you're the artful dodger of Europe.
Well, if that is the charge, I'm definitely not guilty of that. I think it's, it's preposterous. I do believe that our success story as a country might not go down well with others, but it is a success story that will continue for a long time.
After Daphne Caruana Galizia's assassination, her son Matthew wrote, "If institutions were already working, there would be no assassination to investigate, and my brothers and I would still have a mother." What do you say to that?
Well, I have made it very clear that I would never take issue with people who have lost their mother in such a brutal assassination. I've said myself that if my mother was killed in such instances, I would say much worse things than that.
Prime Minister, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Let's return to that dark, dark fantasy of mine that I had a whole body transplant and am now Kurt Farrugia, the Prime Minister's consigliere. My advice, if I were him, would be to say, "Hey boss, has it ever occurred to you that you smile too much?" Since that interview, an inquiry here in Malta has officially cleared Prime Minister Muscat and his wife, but questions remain about the integrity of that process. But there's more on Chris Cardona, and Daphne would have bloody loved it. Chris Cardona has said, to be fair, "I cannot rule out that as a lawyer who goes to many places on the island, I might have found myself with unsavoury people." Quite how unsavoury Chris Cardona's company has been is worth looking at closely. After her killing, a group of journalists from around the world have got together and created the Daphne Project, designed to tell her stories from beyond the grave. It's an extraordinary development and makes me wonder that journalists are perhaps not quite as wicked as we are often painted. The Daphne Project has uncovered a story that shortly after the assassination, but before the arrest of the accused, Mr. Cardona was seen drinking in a pub on the island with one of the accused assassins, Alfred Di Giorgio. All concerned deny any wrongdoing. Very recently, one of the best and the bravest of the Daphne Project journalists, Carlo Bonini of La Repubblica, got hold of a phone tap by Malta's intelligence agency from long before the killing. They were listening in to phone conversations in relation to some other criminal activity. One day they recorded a man talk to Daphne, tell her something that would perhaps make him look less a subject of her journalistic scrutiny. Then, Bonini reported, there were two more calls immediately after. One was to Alfred Di Giorgio, the other was to Chris Cardona. Now, Cardona denies that. Go on, do that again properly. Got it. It's come out that Chris Cardona knows Di Giorgio socially, but they had met at a bachelor party. So, the charge is, the economic, wait for it, So the economic minister of Malta has reportedly, he denies it, has reportedly been seen with one of the men accused of murdering Daphne both before and after the killing. Malta, this doesn't look good. Supporters of Prime Minister Joseph Muscat may say, but I'm not complying with the rules of journalistic fair play. Journalists should give equal weight over time to two sides of a political argument in a democracy. But we didn't report the start of the Second World War impartially. Not the Polish side claims that they were invaded, the Nazi side claims that border violations meant blah, blah, blah. The concept we rely upon is due impartiality. So if the evidence stacks up that the Church of Scientology is a cult or North Korea is a tyranny, we make that call. If we see a journalist murdered in cold blood and what looks like a government cover-up, then we can call that too. In that light, what on earth is Malta's economic minister doing associating with this man Di Giorgio? And some might add, why is Prime Minister Joseph Muscat still standing by Chris Cardona? This spring, Henley and Partners held a fancy bun fight in the City of London. Guest of honour was Prime Minister Joseph Muscat. Earlier in the day, my BBC colleague Justin Webb had compared a Henley and Partners session with special guest Sir Christopher Mayer, a former British ambassador to the United States. Doing my bit for BBC Balance, I stood out in the cold and waited for the Prime Minister Muscat's entourage. He arrived in a chauffeur-driven Range Rover, complete with multiple bodyguards. Perhaps they were there to protect the Prime Minister from the entirely peaceful protest by people from Malta living in London. Daphne's youngest son, Paul Caruana Galizia, was one of them. As soon as Prime Minister Muscat left the car, I stepped forward and asked him, "Do you stand by your economics minister, Chris Cardona?" I didn't hear his reply because one of his bodyguards thumped me hard in the chest. It's all part of the service the BBC likes to provide. If you doubt my word, this act of aggression was caught by a camera operator from Reuters. And Stephen Gray, my colleague and friend from Reuters, is sitting over there. Though, to be fair, he didn't film that bit. Next time, thank you for that service. And Stephen, and many, many other journalists have done amazing work on Daphne Caruana Galizia. So, again, Malta, this doesn't look good. Given the Prime Minister's continued support for Cardona, no one should be surprised that more and more people around the world and in Malta are calling for a full public inquiry into the killing of Daphne Caruana Galizia. What is so strange and troubling about the aftermath of Daphne's assassination is that the government's employees routinely vandalize a shrine to her here in the capital, Valletta. It's as if the government is somehow ashamed of her memory, that they are seeking to airbrush her name from history. Fat chance. The Kremlin tried to do this too. Boris Nemtsov was, like Daphne, someone who dared to speak truth to power. At the Perugia Journalism Festival this spring, I was chatting to Daphne's sister Corinne and a brilliant Russian journalist, Galina Timchenko, who knew Nemtsov well. I asked Corinne how many times the authorities had vandalized Daphne's shrine in Valletta. 7, 8 times, she said. I know the number has gone up since then. I know it's gone up a lot. I asked Galina how many times did the Kremlin vandalize Nemtsov's shrine. The answer, 192 times. The government of Malta can put the flowers in the bin. The government can trash Daphne's photographs. The government can snuff out the candles, but it can never kill the light that Daphne shone. To the government of Malta, I would respectfully say this, that not allowing people to grieve at a shrine for Daphne Caruana Galizia doesn't just look bad, it looks as though you are in some way keen to hush up a murder. Free Malta keep on going. In the end, the Kremlin gave up, and Nemtsov has a shrine in the dead center of Moscow. And so, one day soon, will Daphne Caruana Galizia. For some, all of this is about staying in power. But for us, and for Daphne, it's much more important than that. It's about life and death. Thank you.
Have some time for opening the discussion to the floor. Any questions or any comment anyone would like to make, while we have the privilege of John Sweeney's company.
Thank you. Where do you think Malta will be in 5 years' time from now?
South of Italy. Sorry, I'm being flippant. I was very moved by everybody standing up then. This isn't about me, it's about her and all of us who care about the things that she stood for. I don't even know where my own country will be in 5 years' time. I suspect north of France is... I don't know. And remember, I work for the BBC. These are not the views of the BBC, but something I know absolutely as a human being, it's wrong to tear down the shrine again and again and again. It's wrong to cover it up. And then there were representatives from the international media organizations who are around the world, and they put up flowers and candles, and yesterday and this morning they were gone. And I think this sends a terrible, terrible signal, and that should stop. But your question is above my pay grade, I'm afraid.
One question I have for you is, do you have an opinion on the conclusions of the E-Grant inquiry?
I do not have opinions, but I think the problem with the inquiry is that the process is not clear and transparent, as I understand it. And the secondary issue is that this is an analysis of a mechanism which many people in the world think is about laundering money or hiding money from eyes that should see. And all of that is fundamentally wrong. You should not, in a democracy, have people in power, senior politicians, with bank accounts which people don't know about. It's a simple point. So I don't understand all of the complexities, but there is something not right about the process, it feels, and there is something not right about this. I do know that Daphne was on the money, as I said before, on the story, because when she broke it Pilatus Bank, suddenly there was a movement of bags late at night by Mr. Ali Sadra, and he was seen running away. And then it gets on a jet, and then the jet ends up, funnily enough, in Azerbaijan. And Mr. Ali Sadra, the banker, he's now a guest of the FBI. I do hope that never happens to me, who knows? But there is something, it doesn't smell right, if I can put it as moderately as that.
Both before and since her assassination, Daphne was accused of being a hate blogger, although she was never sued for hate speech, and for writing a blog that fell well outside what would be considered respectable journalism. Putting aside any individual misjudgments, I'm asking you, this time as a BBC journalist, not as John Sweeney, have you seen anything in Daphne's blog, even what is over the top, that would fall outside mainstream journalism as understood in Western Europe and North America?
When I came here, I was aware of the criticisms of Daphne's blog, and it felt to me that some of the language was intemperate or over the top, as I said. As I've got to understand Malta a little bit, if I was her, I would have sworn more often, and you know, I would, because some of it is incredible. I mean, and also, you know, so Pilatus Bank is a respectable bank. We got this, you know, a lot of correspondence from the fancy law firm, all of that, and then Kapow, the great banker, is a guest of the FBI. Mr. Cardona is suing. He's suing because his good name has been besmirched because of a nasty allegation she made, and then she said, I can, you know, prove I'm wrong, let's get your phone records. And Mr. Cardona drops the libel action. But she's still, as I understand it, she's still being sued. I don't understand how it's right and proper for anyone to sue a dead person. I think that's wrong. So there are a number of things. Essentially, the answer to your question in a nutshell is that to an outsider coming into the story, I felt, well, maybe the criticisms of Daphne were that she was over the top, could be, you know, you've got to listen to them, you've got to investigate those. Over time, and as I understand the story, then she was on the money, no question.
So two questions, kind of unrelated to each other. First of all, I consider myself as a free speech radical. I believe there is no right more fundamental than free speech. What would you say the implications are of media moguls like Mark Zuckerberg pledging to police a term as subjective as hate speech? And the second question would be, how emotional do you think we're getting, even a year after Daphne's assassination, that it's kind of sometimes leading us to, I would say, maybe look too much into links that most likely are just circumstantial. So, for example, you probably heard of Joseph Muscat. I believe it was him fainting on the eve of her assassination. And you get everyone saying, oh, well, there you go.
The internet is a wonderful thing, and Facebook and Twitter and all of those things help people connect with people. But there are limits, and there are clear dangers where organizations, so for example, the government of Russia, it says, or rather the FBI seems to be saying, there's a lot of evidence stacking up that the Russians use social media, Facebook, etc., to subvert, to some measure, we can't quite work out how much, the election of Donald Trump. That's a big concern. It's massive. So the problem is the internet is the Wild West. The second problem related to that is that there is not that when I was a boy, a long time ago, there were things called facts and then there were theory stories and we understood them. And on the internet these days, you can't easily tell the difference. And so there is a false narrative going around the world in many, many countries where it's very, very difficult to say this is a fact and we can agree upon this. And Obama has talked about this. At the moment, the problem is there is no common conversation in the United States, but also I suspect here as well, because there are many, many people in Malta who think that Daphne was completely wrong. But I don't think that emotion has clouded the judgment. It's not just me. There are dozens and dozens, 60 journalistic organizations in the Daphne Project, but essentially there are dozens and dozens of journalists from around the world who look at the evidence. If Mr. Cardona has been wronged, if his good name has been besmirched, then carry on with the libel action. But don't wait months and months and months and then drop it. That's a bit weird. And what's wrong with, I'm innocent, I wasn't there, here are my phone records. If somebody accuses me, and I'm a government minister, of that kind of stuff, well, I'm going to argue. I'm going to fight for my good name. And when you ask the question, you get thumped. Mr. Prime Minister, are you standing by Chris Cardona? Oh, I'm sorry, that's not good. So I don't think that's emotional. The evidence, for example, about the bung, the money, this association and the strange involvement of Tony Blair and the Azerbaijanis and Mr. Muscat, it's all strange, it's weird. And there's stuff you read and you think, how's that work? All I know is a simple thing. Now all of this, all concerned deny any wrongdoing. I simply know, and this is something that's just as a human being, it's wrong to destroy a shrine to a dead woman.
Mr. Sweeney, thank you very much for being here today. You made a brief reference to the E-Grant investigation. One thing that strikes me odd, is probably the best way to put it, is the Prime Minister has maintained that this was a frame-up, that the documents were falsified, and that essentially he's innocent. The documents would have been falsified by the person who had handed these documents over or who has claimed to see them and have them. Does it not strike you as being a bit strange that Maria Efimova has not been indicted by the Maltese police or requested to come to Malta for investigation? They haven't mentioned her at all. They only point to the ex-leader of the opposition, Simon Busuttil, as having been the person who conjured up this frame-up. But they absolutely take no action against the person who has been named as the person who has found or seen these documents.
As I understand it, they did seek to extradite Maria Efimova. And they lost the case.
Yes, but not over this.
And the Greek court said, we're not doing this. Again, this is not the right arena, I think, for a detailed forensic. Thank you, Manuel. All I can say is it doesn't look good, and I do not think the process is the process whereby the government has said, we've looked at this, and it's not just the government, it's not the government, there's a magistrate, but there's an issue about the integrity of the process and the transparency of the whole process, as I understand it. As I said, I can only ask the Prime Minister questions when he allowed me to do that in January, and you saw his answers, and you can find them convincing or not convincing. Each to their own, as they say.
I wanted to share with you and the audience an incident which, in my opinion, was and is disturbing, which occurred in Parliament just 90 minutes ago. And I would like to share and ask for your considered opinion or interpretation. At 6:30 in the evening in Parliament, Minister Chris Cardona asked the chair's protection asking the chair to find me in breach of privilege, because last week I tweeted these words without referring to anybody or mentioning anybody. This evening, you could see how the corrupt and those who are cheek by jowl with murderers behave. They don't allow those who expose their lies and evil to speak. That was my tweet. Minister Chris Cardona this evening claimed that those words were referring to him. I immediately retorted because I couldn't believe what I was just hearing. And I told him, Minister, how on earth do you know I was referring to you? Is it the case of an unsolicited excuse being proof of guilt? This is the situation, and I would like not only to share, but to ask your opinion or interpretation. When somebody thinks or believes that words were being addressed to him, when that person's name was not even mentioned or referred to remotely, does that denote Macbeth trying to clear his hands of the blood, but all the waters of the rivers of the world cannot clear and wash those hands?
I think that was Mrs. Macbeth.
You're right, Manuel.
Macbeth said, out, out, damn spot.
I think that was Mrs.
That was Mrs.
Well,
Macbeth.
yes. Jason, I don't, it's difficult for me to comment on that, other than a simple point is that when I was in Malta, I wanted to interview Chris Cardona, and I also wanted to interview Keith Shembury and Mr. Mitzi, and none of them were available. And when I am being accused of some of the things that Chris Cardona has been accused of, and I'm a Democratic politician, I would go and hunt down the journalists and the people who are saying bad things about me, and I'm going to say, that's unfair, and this is my view, this is my defense. So, but what he's doing, if you're right, but he's actually, I can't comment on that, I'm afraid.
One final question, please.
First of all, thank you for the lecture and also your work as a journalist.
It's great that not everybody's old.
I would like to ask, for those people who subscribe to unknowingly to authoritarianism, what do you think as a journalist is the key to making them change, even by a bit, their mentality and to being more open to different ideas? Thank you.
If you have a cult, you have a messiah, you have some kind of brainwashing or thought reform, and you do harm. Those are the three critical definitions of a cult. And the great expert on this was a guy called Professor Robert Lifton, who was an American military psychiatrist who treated GIs who had been brainwashed in North Korea, and there was a small number of them who were brainwashed so successfully that they volunteered to stay inside North Korea rather than return home to the States. And eventually they were repatriated, and Lifton treated them. And there's a long list of 8 factors that help brainwashing. One of them, the first one, is constriction of information. You throttle information, you constrict information, you're on your way to George Orwell's 1984. So, openness, willing to engage, willing to debate, and willingness to make yourself available for scrutiny, those are defenses. Secondly, Lifton talks about tolerance of mockery and tolerance of humor. So, You go to China and somebody cracks a joke at President Xi's expense, you're in trouble. You do that with good information about Vladimir Putin, you may die. And so there is a problem about any society or any leader who doesn't have a sense of humor, who can't engage with or enjoy a joke at his or her expense. And so at least some of the stuff that Daphne was doing was on the money, as I said before, in terms of mockery. And people say, well, that's, you know, it's unfair. Well, why not? Because we live in a free and open society, and we have checks and balances, and part of that is mocking. And this also applies, it's not just politics, it applies to religion. Any religion that says, don't mock, because we are too holy for mockery. The Dalai Lama, who I like, I once interviewed a long time ago. I was poor and I'd run out of socks. And because he was a god king, I put on a bow tie. And he said, why are you wearing a bow tie but no socks? But he said, if anybody wants to abuse mock Tibetan Buddhism, go ahead. I think some of the politicians here could learn a bit from His Holiness. So the answer is that it's kind of like common sense. If if you've got friends at school, at university, and there's one person who is maybe charismatic, but actually doesn't allow any of his friends to mock him, he's trouble. He shouldn't have power. Tolerance of comedy, tolerance of mockery, tolerance of the other side of the argument, it's part of what democracy is. What I'm reading, it's taken me forever, it's taken me too long to get around to reading it, but I'm reading Nicholas Monserrat's wonderful book about Malta, the Capellan. And it's what's so upsetting for me is the incredible struggle and loss of life and heroism of your grandfathers and grandmothers of that great generation who helped keep this island going and safe, so that in the end, the forces of freedom and democracy, flawed as they were, managed to save Malta and keep it. And the fantastic heroism of Malta then, compared to what is happening now, it's a tragedy.
Thank you, John. When I introduced, I referred to a question you were asked: why did you accept the invitation? But I suppose there's a question that comes before that: why did we invite you? And the sincere answer to that is that sometimes when information is restricted, and sometimes when criticism is not tolerated, sometimes we get to a point where we doubt ourselves. We doubt our own sanity, our own rationality. We wonder if we are, after all, the loons or the fans they say we are. So it feels good to hear you talk, but it feels good to remember sometimes that a fresh look at the situation we're in and of our story, a fresh pair of eyes who hold no stake in the political game in Malta, will ultimately reach conclusions that are similar to ours and that give us comfort in our own sanity. So that's why you're here, because so thank you very much. You can follow John Sweeney on Twitter. His handle is John Sweeney Roar, and after I saw the first video clip there, I have a guess where that came from. Or he's on Facebook, John Sweeney, or you can watch him on BBC Newsnight. Thank you, John.
Thank you.